All right, everybody, so I'm going to be giving you guys a preview into my lesson pertaining to the lead up of the American Civil War, specifically the issues that followed in the United States in the 1850s. So we have a PowerPoint that my students will be viewing, which is titled Road to Secession, the 1850s. Starting off, we're going to have a 10-minute warm-up period, which will be a simple question which the students are to answer, which is, as the United States expanded geographically, what issues do you think would cause its destabilization? So the main purpose of this is that I'm working with the students' articulation on vocabulary while also getting them to connect other ideas, such as the concept of manifest destiny and westward expansion, which we talked about in the last unit. I also have with them the idea to work with a partner, right? Think, pair, share, which is one of the big ideas that we continue to use within the class. So one of the big things I've shared with them since the start is the importance of collaboration instead of copying. So ideally, as the unit would progress, they should be understanding the concept of the issue of slavery and whether or not new territories admitted into the Union within the United States are either going to be slave or free states, which is one of the big things that we spoke about as we have the Louisiana Purchase, the new territories acquired by the Mexico-American War, and the issue of what to do with these territories. So some of the big problems we've talked about, right, would be the issue following the Mexican-American War and what to do with these new territories. Right, as we can see here, we have the issue of obviously California statehood, which is focused primarily, right, on whether or not California should be admitted as a free state or not. Then we have the southern states, right, the fire eaters that are really focusing within the secession movement, which starts as early as 1840, and we see progression within that. Then we have the premises and the issues with the Underground Railroad and the Fugitive Slave Act, which was passed within the same time frame. So all these issues are things that we're going to end up speaking about throughout the entirety of the lecture, as well as the key presidential elections of the time, with the 1850 to the 1856, and then the 1860 elections. Right, so we have the big issue, obviously the Compromise of 1850. We talk about these things and the importance of the new territory, which is admitted following the Mexican-American War, which would be the Utah, New Mexico, and California territories, as well as the annexation of Texas by the United States. These are some of the things that we speak about. Throughout the lecture, I'm going to be stopping primarily to maybe seeing whether or not students can either have previous knowledge or look to maybe connect the dots from previous lectures into the issues that we have within the United States at the time. So throughout the entire lecture, we have a lot of maps and a lot of other graphics that will be used in order to help the students gather the information rather than just content-heavy slides. So I think roughly there's about 27 to 30 slides on this lecture, but for the most part, a lot of them are content light or have very informational graphics such as the one we see above. So we're also going to be talking about the issue of Uncle Tom's Cabin, which is seen as one of the major issues in the 1850s and one of the causations for the Civil War due to the spread of abolition that we see within the publication of Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe. So we end up seeing obviously a depiction of Uncle Tom's Cabin along with the way that it was advertised in the North at the time. Then we're going to talk a lot about the issues of political parties of the era, one of the most famous of which is the Know Nothings, which was an early nationalist party that rose out of the anti-immigrant fervor and the unwillingness by both the Democratic and the Whig parties of the era to do anything about what the common Americans seen as the immigrant plague, specifically the Irish. So there's a big problem within New York, for example, with anti-Irish fervor, which we talk about in this lecture here. And then we continue to speak about specifically within the draft riots in 1863 in New York, which had to be put down by federal troops. Speaking about the presidential election, we have the issue of the Democratic continual dominance and the perceived concept within the United States, specifically in the North, that the higher ups within the presidential parties, right, within the Supreme Court and even Congress and Senate were pro-slavery, right, and anti-abolitionists, right, primarily through the fact that the Democratic Party dominated the 52 and 56 elections. And then we get into the Dred Scott decision, in which the decision was primarily written based off of pseudoscience, and was kind of a continuation of this racial-based slavery that was implemented or transformed into the United States. We speak about this, and this is one of the connections that we made previously in our classes in our lecture, and how we have the occurrences of free blacks actually voting and serving in into juries and pressing forth their liberties that were given by Englishmen early on in the 1600s, that were gradually taken away through this racial-based slavery that was implemented in the United States. We talk about how this caused big problems, right? The death and eventual destruction of the Whig Party in the 52 election, and how this ended up transforming and causing the rise of the Republican Party, led by Abraham Lincoln, right? We end up talking about pretty extensively then the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which is important in how this set a precedent of destroying the Missouri Compromise in the last-ditch attempt, and true to really prevent the Civil War. So a lot of the things that we're leading up into are connecting the dots into previous lessons. So the 1820 Missouri Compromise was one of the big things that we spoke about, following the annexation and purchase of Louisiana territories, and within a big portion of the Manifest Destiny concept, which is spread during the era of good feeling. So a lot of our lectures build on these previous lessons that we've spoken about, and one of the big things I continue to attempt within my classes is to create content-rich lectures, which they're able to connect the dots or grab information from previous lessons in order to create a well-formed and well-established narrative for these students that they can expand their knowledge on, and show how, say for example, an issue back in 1820 can directly affect an issue that we have in 1853 within the Kansas-Nebraska Compromise, for example. So this is just a snippet of the lecture. As we can see, we get into Bleeding Kansas and talk about issues as well as that. Then we talk about how this leads into, right, the anarchist movements within John Brown, who is a radical anti-abolitionist, and then talk about the rise of the Republican Party, formed out of what was left of the Whigs and the Northern Democrats that did not agree with slavery, as well as the Know-Nothings, and how this coalition of political parties formed into the Republican Party, led by Abraham Lincoln, and part of the reason as to why Southern Democrats instantly believed that they were going to abolish slavery since Abraham Lincoln was elected, dealt specifically with the fact that it was led by free soilers who were completely anti-slavery or abolitionists. So these are some of the things that we talk about. So these are some of the big things that we lead into, and we talk pretty extensively about, the Dred Scott decision, and why this was a big reading and leading cause into the American Civil War. So in order not to go into too much, and I have to actually end up prepping for my AP psychology class that we have coming up, this is just an example of the lesson that we'll be working with my US history class.